What do you do when your husband calls to say he's divorcing you and sold your home without your consent? Grace had been married to David for 6 years, building a life she believed in. But the phone call shattered everything. David was divorcing her and had already sold the apartment they'd worked so hard for. The betrayal stung, but Grace quickly realized she had one thing David didn't control. Stay tuned to see how Grace fights back, and don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories of resilience. The conference room buzzed with chatter as I glanced at my phone. The screen lit up with an incoming call from David, and I stepped into the hallway, expecting the usual, "How's the trip? When will you be home?" Instead, David's voice cut through, cold and smug, sending a chill down my spine. "I'm divorcing you," he said, almost triumphant. "I've already sold the apartment, so you'll need to figure out where you're going to live. Enjoy that." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The audacity of it! The complete lack of remorse. It felt like a punch to the gut, but I forced myself to focus. My hand tightened around the phone as his words sank in. "You sold the apartment?" I managed, keeping my voice steady, as if the calmness would somehow shield me from the storm brewing inside. "Yeah," he said with a dry laugh. "Brittany and I need the money to set up our life together. She deserves better than a tiny place like that anyway." Brittany. The name hit me like a slap. I'd suspected for months that there was someone else David's late nights, his sudden work trips, the distance growing between us. The pieces had all fallen into place, but hearing him say her name so casually, like I was the unwanted guest in their life, ignited a fierce fire in my chest. "Sounds good," I replied. Every ounce of emotion I could muster swallowed back. I refused to give him the satisfaction of hearing me crack. My name is Grace, and up until that moment, I thought I had married a man I could trust. David and I had been together for 6 years. It wasn't perfect, but I believed in us, in the partnership we had built. We worked hard for everything. We had our apartment, a cozy 2-bedroom in the city that had felt like a dream the moment I stepped inside. It was more than just a home. It was the symbol of everything we'd created together. At least, that's what I thought. Looking back now, the signs had always been there, small cracks in the foundation I'd been too blind to see. David's dismissive attitude when I asked about finances. His tendency to brush off my concerns with a smile and a quick kiss. I always assumed his confidence came from knowing what he was doing. But now, I realized it came from knowing he could manipulate me into believing everything was fine, that I was the one who was just too sensitive. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I sat through client meetings, nodding in all the right places while my mind raced. David thought he'd won. He thought he could tear everything down, sell the apartment I had worked so hard for, and walk away unscathed. But there was one detail he didn't know. The apartment deed had been in my name alone for months. After we refinanced earlier that year, I had it transferred. David had agreed to it without question, just happy for a lower interest rate. He hadn't bothered to read the paperwork he signed or ask about the details. His carelessness was going to be his undoing. By the time I returned to my hotel room that evening, the shock had turned into resolve. I wasn't going to cry. I wasn't going to beg. If David wanted to fight, fine. But this was a fight I was going to win. The first call I made was to Sophia, my lawyer and longtime friend. I laid everything out, voice calm, even as my heart pounded in my chest. "He sold the apartment?" she repeated, disbelief evident in her voice. "Does he even realize that he can't do that without your consent?" "Apparently not," I said, a hint of amusement creeping into my tone. "He thinks he's already spent the money on his new life with Brittany." Sophia laughed dryly. "Well, he's in for a rude awakening. The sale is invalid, you can prove sole ownership, and if he's taken any money from the buyer, he's on the hook for fraud." The word fraud sent a jolt of satisfaction through me. "What do we need to do?" I asked. "First, we'll notify the buyer that the sale isn't legal," Sophia said. "Then we'll draft a formal letter for David outlining the consequences of his actions. If he's dumb enough to try anything else, we'll take him to court." See, as I hung up, I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. David thought he'd outsmarted me, that he'd left me powerless and scrambling. But in reality, he'd just set himself up for the ultimate humiliation. I spent the rest of the trip focusing on my work, compartmentalizing my emotions and channeling my energy into the task ahead. The betrayal hurt, but the prospect of reclaiming my life and watching David's smugness crumble gave me a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in months. When I boarded the plane home, I was ready. Ready to face David, ready to dismantle his lies, and ready to start a new chapter without him. This wasn't just about winning. It was about taking back control. The flight home gave me hours to think about how everything had unraveled. David's arrogance was astounding. He hadn't even tried to hide his betrayal, as if I was just another obstacle to bulldoze on his path to freedom. But instead of spiraling into anger, I focused on what I'd do when I returned. David thought I was powerless, but he didn't realize I'd been playing the long game without even knowing it. As the plane touched down, my first call was to Sophia. "I'm back," I said as I hauled my suitcase off the luggage carousel. "What's the next step?" "We've already notified the buyer," she replied, her tone brisk and efficient. "They were shocked, to say the least, and not too happy with David. They're willing to cooperate, which helps our case." "And David?" I asked. "I sent the formal letter to his email this morning," she said. "It outlines the illegality of the sale, your sole ownership of the apartment, and the potential consequences of fraud. He hasn't responded yet, but if I had to guess, he's going to be furious." Good, I thought. Let him stew. When I arrived home, the apartment felt unnervingly quiet. David's things were still scattered around his jackets, casually draped over the chair, his shoes carelessly tossed by the door, but the atmosphere had shifted like the very energy of the place had changed. I took a slow breath, setting my suitcase down, fully aware that the confrontation was coming soon enough. Sure enough, David stormed in that evening, his face flushed with anger, his phone gripped tightly in his hand. "What the hell is this?" he shouted, waving the letter Sophia had sent. "You're telling me I can't sell the apartment? It's half mine." I crossed my arms, meeting his fury with calm. "No, David," I said, voice steady. "It's not. The deed has been in my name for months now. You can't sell something you don't own." He froze, a mix of confusion and rage flashing across his face. "What the hell are you talking about?" I grabbed the deed from the file I had prepared earlier, holding it up for him to see. "After we refinanced, I had the deed transferred to my name. You signed off on it, remember? Or were you too busy skimming the paperwork like you always do?" For a moment, he said nothing, just staring at the document, his face a mask of disbelief. Then, his expression twisted into a sneer. "You think you're so smart, don't you? This doesn't change anything. I already made a deal, and when it falls apart, you'll look like the fool." I stared at him unblinking. "The sale is void, David. The buyer knows it, and they're prepared to take legal action if you don't return the money. Oh, and speaking of money," I stepped closer, my voice dropping low. "If you've spent a single cent of that deposit, you're in even bigger trouble." For the first time, David's confidence faltered. "You don't know what you're talking about," he muttered, his eyes avoiding mine. "Oh, I know exactly what I'm talking about," I said, voice firm. "For years, you've treated me like I'm too naive to notice what you're doing. But guess what, David? I've been paying attention. And now you're going to face the consequences." Frustration mounted as he started pacing. "This is ridiculous. You're blowing everything out of proportion. You can't just kick me out of here." I raised an eyebrow. "Actually, I can. This apartment is legally mine. You can stay here for now, but only because I'm giving you time to figure out your next move. But let me make it clear, I'm not going anywhere." In the days that followed, David's anger turned to desperation. He called me repeatedly, leaving frantic voicemails that alternated between begging and threatening. Meanwhile, Sophia worked tirelessly behind the scenes to make sure every loose end was tied up. The buyer rescinded the agreement, furious with David for wasting their time and money, and Sophia began drafting the preliminary paperwork for the divorce proceedings. "You're in a good position, Grace," she told me during one of our meetings. "David has no leverage here. Between the voided sale and the fraud charges looming over him, he'll have no choice but to cooperate if he wants to avoid a bigger mess." Her words were comforting, but they also hit home in a way I hadn't expected. They reminded me just how much control I had allowed David to hold over my life. For years, I'd ignored his dismissiveness, told myself it wasn't worth the fight. But now I saw how much I'd been giving up, and I was determined to take it all back. One evening, Olivia, my best friend, came over to help me reorganize the apartment. Together, we began boxing up David's things, carefully stacking them in the corner of the living room. "How's he taking all this?" Olivia asked, holding up one of his gaudy ties, a smirk playing at the corners of her mouth. "Not well," I said, laughing despite myself. "He's still convinced he can talk his way out of it, but I'm not budging." "Good," she said, tossing the tie into the box. "He doesn't deserve a single inch of your space or your time." I nodded, feeling a wave of gratitude for her support. For so long, I'd felt alone in my marriage, carrying the emotional and financial burden while David took credit for everything. But now I had people in my corner, and that made all the difference. The final piece of my plan fell into place the day David brought Brittany to the apartment. I was sitting at the dining table reviewing some paperwork when they walked in, like they owned the place. Brittany looked around with a smug smile, her arm looped through David's. "So, this is where we're staying," she said, her voice dripping with entitlement. I stood up, my heart pounding, but my resolve unshaken. "No," I said firmly. "This is where David was staying. You, Brittany, won't be staying here at all." Her smile faltered, and she glanced at David, who looked equally stunned. "What is this?" he demanded. "This," I said, gesturing to the apartment around me, "is my home. Not yours, not hers, and certainly not a hotel for you to shack up in after stabbing me in the back." Brittany's expression turned icy, but she said nothing. David, on the other hand, looked like he was about to explode. "You can't do this!" he shouted. "You're being unreasonable." I met his gaze, unflinching. "No, David, what's unreasonable is thinking you could sell my home, walk away with the money, and expect me to just roll over. You're lucky I haven't filed criminal charges. For now." David stood in the doorway, his face red with frustration, while Brittany crossed her arms, looking increasingly uncomfortable. "You're being ridiculous, Grace," he said, his voice laced with desperation. "You can't just kick me out of my own home." I took a step forward, my voice calm but unwavering. "This is my home, David. The deed has been in my name for months, and you know that. You signed the paperwork without even reading it, just like you always do. So no, this isn't your home anymore." Brittany glanced at David, her perfectly manicured hand tightening around her purse strap. "Wait, what's she talking about?" she asked, her tone sharp. "You said this was your apartment, that you sold it." He flinched, trying to wave her off. "It's complicated. I'll handle it." "Oh, it's not complicated," I said, stepping closer. "You tried to sell an apartment that doesn't belong to you. That sale is void, David, and as of right now, you don't have a leg to stand on." Brittany's composure cracked. "You mean the money you told me you had?" She stopped mid-sentence, her voice rising. "Oh my God, did you lie about that too?" "Brittany, let me explain," David said quickly, holding his hands up, but she wasn't having it. "No," I said, cutting him off. "Let me explain. David tried to sell the apartment behind my back, thinking he could pocket the money and leave me with nothing. What he didn't know is that I had the deed transferred to my name months ago. So not only did he fail to sell it, but he also committed fraud by pretending he could." Brittany's mouth opened and closed like a fish, gasping for air. "Fraud," she whispered, taking a step away from him. "Are you serious?" "Yes, fraud," I said, crossing my arms. "And I'm prepared to press charges if he doesn't get his things and leave by the end of the day." David's facade finally cracked. "You can't do this, Grace," he said, his voice pleading now. "We've been together for 6 years. You can't just throw me out." "You threw me out the moment you made that phone call," I said, my voice hardening. "You told me you were divorcing me and laughed about me having to find a new place to live. You didn't just betray me, David. You tried to ruin me. So don't stand there and act like you're the victim." Brittany took another step back, her eyes darting between us. "This is insane," she muttered, clutching her purse tighter. "You didn't tell me any of this, David. You said you had everything handled." He turned to her, desperation written all over his face. "Brittany, I can fix this. I just need—" She cut him off with a raised hand. Just don't. I'm not getting dragged into your mess." Without another word, she turned on her heel and stormed out, leaving him standing there stunned. I couldn't help but smile as the door clicked shut behind her. "Looks like you're on your own," I said, turning back to David. "Now, let's talk about what happens next." He collapsed onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. "Grace, please. I screwed up, I know that, but you don't have to do this." I stood tall, my resolve unshaken as I grabbed the folder from the kitchen counter and placed it deliberately on the coffee table in front of him. "You're right," I said, voice steady. "I don't have to do this, but I am. This is the divorce paperwork. My lawyer's already drafted it, and I suggest you sign it quickly. The sooner you do, the sooner we can both move on." He stared at the folder, his face draining of color. "You really hate me that much?" "Hate you?" I let out a bitter laugh, the sound harsh in the still air. "No, David, I don't hate you. I feel sorry for you. You had everything someone who loved you, a home we built together, and you threw it all away because you couldn't see past your own ego." My heart pounded, but I stood firm, my voice unwavering. "I want you out of here by the end of the day. Take your things and figure out where you're going to stay. This is the last time I'm giving you any grace." He opened his mouth to argue, but stopped, his shoulders slumping in defeat. "Fine," he muttered, barely audible. "I'll go." "Good," I said, walking toward the door, my tone sharp. "And don't even think about trying anything else. Sophia's already handling everything, and the next time you cross a line, I won't hesitate to let the courts handle it." As I opened the door, David slowly stood, grabbing his coat. He didn't look at me as he walked out, his footsteps heavy with resignation, each one echoing in the stillness of the apartment. For a brief moment, a pang of sadness hit me, not for him, but for the life we could have had if he'd been the man I thought he was. But that moment passed swiftly, replaced by something far stronger: relief. I closed the door behind him, locking it with the new key I'd had made. This was my home now. No one, especially not David, would take it from me again. The silence after David left was deafening. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe again. The weight of his presence, his entitlement, and his lies had vanished. Now it was just me, the home I had built, and the quiet realization that I had won not just against him, but against every doubt I'd ever had about standing up for myself. I stood in the middle of the living room, taking in the emptiness where his things had once been. His oversized gaming chair, the framed jerseys that had cluttered the walls, and the tacky coffee table he'd insisted on keeping gone. The apartment looked cleaner, brighter, like it was mine again. Olivia came by that evening carrying takeout and a bottle of wine. She flopped down onto the couch with a dramatic sigh. "Is he really gone?" "Gone and not coming back," I said, pouring us each a glass of wine. "I gave him until the end of the day to pack his things. He didn't argue." Olivia raised her glass. "To fresh starts and well-deserved victories." I clinked my glass against hers, feeling the weight of the past week slowly lifting, and to never letting someone walk all over me again. Over the next few days, I began to reclaim the apartment piece by piece. I rearranged the furniture, moved my favorite artwork into the living room, and filled the space with things that made me happy. It wasn't just about redecorating, it was about turning the apartment into a reflection of who I was, not the person David had tried to make me. Sophia called with updates on the legal proceedings, her voice filled with the kind of confidence that made me feel invincible. "The fraud charges are off the table since the buyer decided not to pursue them," she explained. "But the divorce paperwork is moving along smoothly. Once David signs, you'll be officially free." Hearing the word free made my chest tighten. It wasn't just about the divorce. It was about everything I had carried for years. The resentment, the self-doubt, the feeling of being trapped in a marriage that never valued me. For the first time, it was all finally being lifted. David tried reaching out a few times. His messages ranged from half-hearted apologies to pathetic attempts at guilt-tripping me into reconciliation. "I made a mistake," one read. "Can't we at least talk about this?" Another was more desperate. "You're going to ruin me, Grace. Is that what you want?" I didn't reply. For once, I wasn't going to waste my energy trying to fix something broken beyond repair. He had made his choices, and now he was dealing with the consequences. By the end of the week, the apartment had transformed into a completely new space, warm, inviting, and entirely mine. As I sat on the couch, sipping tea with the city lights twinkling outside the window, I reflected on everything that had happened. David's betrayal had been a shock, but it had also been a wake-up call. For too long, I'd believed I didn't deserve better, that I had to settle for whatever scraps of love and respect he was willing to throw my way. But now, I knew better. I wasn't just reclaiming my apartment, I was reclaiming my life. A month later, everything had changed. The apartment was unrecognizable, not because of drastic renovations, but because of how it felt. It reflected me, my tastes, my personality, my newfound independence. The absence of David's clutter and overbearing presence made it feel lighter, freer. The divorce was moving along smoothly. Sophia had handled everything with precision, making sure David had no room to argue or complicate the process. He signed the papers without much fuss, likely realizing he had no leverage. There was no dramatic showdown, no emotional pleas to work things out, just a cold, clean break that was both bittersweet and deeply satisfying. One day, while sorting through old papers, I came across a photo of David and me from our early years together. We were smiling, arms wrapped around each other, full of hope and promise. I stared at it for a moment, letting the memories wash over me. There had been good times, moments when I truly believed we were building a life together. But those moments were gone, overshadowed by years of neglect, manipulation, and betrayal. I tucked the photo into an envelope and put it in a drawer. It wasn't worth keeping out in the open, but I wasn't ready to throw it away either. It was a part of my past, but it didn't define me anymore. Olivia and I celebrated the finalized divorce with dinner and drinks at a trendy rooftop bar downtown. "You're glowing," she said, raising her cocktail in a toast. "Single life suits you." I laughed, feeling a warmth I hadn't felt in years. "It's not the single life," I said. "It's the freedom. For the first time, I don't feel like I'm living under someone else's rules." We toasted to that, and as the night went on, I felt a growing sense of pride in myself. I'd faced one of the hardest moments of my life and come out stronger. I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. Back at home, I started planning for the future. The apartment had become more than a refuge. It was a symbol of everything I'd reclaimed. But I knew I wouldn't stay there forever. Someday, I'd move to a new place, one without any lingering shadows of my life with David. Until then, I was determined to make the most of every moment in the space I had fought so hard to keep. As I curled up on the couch that night, a sense of peace washed over me. I thought about how David had laughed during that phone call, so certain he'd won, and I couldn't help but smile. His arrogance had been his downfall, and my quiet strength had been my salvation. This wasn't just the end of a marriage, it was the beginning of a new chapter 1, where I called the shots, one where I chose happiness on my own terms. And for the first time in a long time, I felt truly free. What do you do when the person you loved most in the world betrays you so completely, so casually, that you have no choice but to fight back? Do you crumble, or do you stand your ground and take control? Grace never saw it coming. The man she had trusted with everything, the man she had worked beside, built a life with, had betrayed her without a second thought. David thought he could take everything from her, the apartment they built together, the life they created, but he was wrong. Grace had been playing the long game without even realizing it. When David tried to sell the apartment behind her back, thinking she was too naive to notice, she turned the tables on him, using his own carelessness against him. David's arrogant attitude was his downfall, and Grace made sure he felt the full weight of his actions. He thought he had won, but in reality, he had set himself up for the ultimate humiliation. Now, Grace is standing tall, finally free of the man who tried to control her, reclaiming her space, her life, and her peace of mind. So, what do you think? Would you have stayed silent, or would you have fought back just like Grace did? Let's talk about it in the comments. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories like this one.
I'm Elizabeth Martin, a 45-year-old marketing manager. My life, though busy and sometimes challenging, has always been fulfilling. I work for a well-established company, and despite the occasional high-pressure situation, I find deep satisfaction in my work. My husband Richard is a kind man at heart, but his priorities have always been a bit skewed. From the beginning of our marriage, he's shown a peculiar devotion to his sister Eleanor and her daughter Sophie. At first, I tried to be understanding. Family is important, after all. But as years went by, I began to feel more like an outsider in my own marriage. Eleanor, Richard's older sister, has been a constant presence in our lives. She's a single mother to Sophie, a lively teenager. Richard often involves them in our plans, sometimes even prioritizing their needs over ours. I've grown used to the last-minute cancellations of our plans because Eleanor needed something. I remember the early days of our marriage when I tried to voice my concerns. Richard would listen, but his actions never changed. I gradually stopped complaining, realizing it was a battle I couldn't win. In a way, I empathized with Richard's sense of obligation. Eleanor had supported him financially during his college years, a fact he often recounted with a mix of gratitude and guilt. Eleanor's story was no fairy tale either. She married young, but soon found herself in a difficult marriage. Her husband, more interested in his career, wanted her to be a stay-at-home mom. When she finally divorced, her financial situation became strained. Richard stepped in as the supportive brother, something I initially admired. But admiration can slowly morph into resentment when the scales are too unbalanced. Our life together was peaceful, yet I often felt alone. Richard's idea of a weekend well spent involved dining out with Eleanor and Sophie, leaving me behind with my thoughts and a quiet house. The turning point came 3 months ago. Richard approached me one evening with a grave look on his face. "Eleanor's getting a divorce," he said, his voice laced with concern. "She's decided to keep custody of Sophie." I knew Eleanor's marriage was rocky, but the news still caught me off guard. Eleanor, with her sharp tongue and haughty attitude, was difficult for me to be around. I recalled our first meeting at Richard's family home, where she had openly mocked my appearance and taste. No one, not even Richard, had come to my defense. Richard's next words were like a punch to the gut. "I'm going to be spending more time at their place," he announced. "Unlike you, Eleanor is delicate. She needs me." His words stung, but I swallowed my pride and simply nodded. Arguing would only push him further into Eleanor's arms. "Take care," I said, forcing a smile as he left. His absence grew more noticeable. Weekends became a solo affair, and even weekdays were spent alone. I'd return from work to an empty, dark home. The loneliness was suffocating. Then, one day, Richard was unexpectedly at home when I arrived, but the atmosphere was anything but welcoming. "You haven't given Eleanor a housewarming gift yet," he accused. "You're getting a bonus soon, right? Buy her something nice, like a designer bag." I was stunned. "Why should I be the one to give a gift? Why don't you do it, Richard?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He became irate, lecturing me on family values and obligations. The conversation left me emotionally drained and deeply hurt. Richard's family seemed to be his only priority, and I was merely an afterthought. A few days later, my phone rang. It was Eleanor. "You heard from Richard, didn't you?" "It's normal to give a housewarming gift," she said, her tone entitled. I couldn't hold back. "You never gave us a wedding gift," I countered. "Not even a congratulations." Her response was cold. "You're Richard's wife. You're supposed to honor me, not the other way around." Her audacity left me speechless. In all my years with Richard, I had never felt so disrespected. It was a wake-up call. I realized that I deserved better, that I couldn't spend the rest of my life in the shadows of someone else's family. That night, as I lay in bed, a plan began to form in my mind. It was time for a change. It was time for me to step out of the shadows and into the light. As the sun peeked through the blinds the next morning, I felt a new sense of determination. Over breakfast, Richard, oblivious to my inner turmoil, talked about his plans to help Eleanor move into her new apartment. I listened, nodding where appropriate, but my mind was elsewhere. Later that day at work, I couldn't shake off the feeling of discontent. My job, which had always been a source of pride and joy, now felt like the only aspect of my life where I had any control. I wondered how I had allowed myself to become so marginal in my own marriage. That evening, Richard didn't come home. It wasn't unusual anymore. I sat alone in the living room, the TV chattering in the background, providing a semblance of company. I realized that this emptiness had become my norm, a stark contrast to the lively, love-filled home I had once envisioned. Weeks passed in a similar pattern. Richard's visits home became more sporadic, and when he was home, his mind seemed elsewhere. Our conversations, once filled with shared dreams and laughter, were now reduced to logistical exchanges. One day, I returned home earlier than usual to find Richard waiting for me. He had a strange look in his eyes, a mix of guilt and something else I couldn't quite place. "Elizabeth, there's something I need to tell you," he began hesitantly. My heart raced, anticipating more bad news. Eleanor's divorce has taken a toll on her. She's struggling to cope, and I think we should help her more, he said. I felt a sense of déjà vu, another request to put his sister's needs above our own. "What do you mean by help her more?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. Richard took a deep breath. "I think Eleanor and Sophie should move in with us for a while. Our house is bigger, and they need the support." I was speechless. The idea of Eleanor and Sophie, with their entitled attitudes, living in our home was unthinkable. Yet I knew arguing would be futile. Richard had made up his mind, and my opinion seemed irrelevant. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The thought of sharing my home with Eleanor and Sophie filled me with dread. It wasn't just about the invasion of my space, it was a symbol of how little my feelings mattered in this marriage. The following week, movers arrived with boxes of Eleanor and Sophie's belongings. I watched as my home transformed into a storage unit for their lives. Each box that entered felt like another piece of my sanctuary being taken away. As the movers left, I sat amidst the clutter, feeling more alone than ever. It was clear that Richard's family would always come first, and I was just a bystander in my own life. It was then that I realized I couldn't live like this anymore. I needed to make a change, for my own sanity and happiness. I had to find the courage to step out of the shadow of Richard's family and reclaim my life. As I pondered my next steps, I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't continue living in a home that no longer felt like mine. I needed to find a place where I could be myself, free from the burden of being the unacknowledged partner in my own marriage. In the days that followed, the atmosphere in our house shifted dramatically. Eleanor and Sophie's presence was overwhelming, their personalities and habits encroaching on every aspect of my once peaceful home. Richard seemed more distant than ever, his attention fully consumed by his sister and niece. I started spending more time at work, often staying late to avoid returning to a house that no longer felt like mine. My colleagues noticed the change in my demeanor, but I brushed off their concerns with a smile and a shrug. Inside, I felt a growing sense of despair. One evening, as I finally mustered the courage to return home, I found Richard waiting for me, a stern look on his face. "Elizabeth, we need to talk," he said, his tone devoid of warmth. My heart sank. "What is it, Richard?" I asked, bracing myself for what was to come. "It's about Eleanor and Sophie," he began. "They're going through a tough time, and I think we need to do more to support them." I felt a flash of anger. "More?" I echoed incredulously. "Richard, they've already taken over our home. What more do you expect from me?" He frowned, his patience wearing thin. "I expect you to be a part of this family, Elizabeth. That means supporting each other, no matter what." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My role in this family had been reduced to a mere supporter, an afterthought in my own life. "And what about us, Richard? What about our marriage?" I asked, my voice trembling with emotion. He avoided my gaze. "This is important to me, Elizabeth. You need to understand that." The conversation went in circles, with Richard refusing to acknowledge my feelings. It was clear that his loyalty lay with Eleanor and Sophie, and I was just an accessory in his life. That night, I lay awake in bed, a mix of emotions churning inside me. I felt betrayed, neglected, and utterly alone. It was a painful realization, but I knew that my marriage as I had known it was over. The next day, I made a decision. I would no longer be a bystander in my own life. I started searching for a new place to live, a haven where I could rebuild my life on my own terms. It wasn't easy. The thought of leaving the home I had built with Richard was daunting, but the prospect of staying in a loveless marriage was far worse. After several weeks of searching, I found a small apartment in a quiet neighborhood. It was modest, but it was mine. I signed the lease with a mixture of fear and excitement, I didn't tell Richard about my plans. I knew he wouldn't understand, and I no longer cared to seek his approval. I began packing my belongings in secret, each item a reminder of the life I was leaving behind. The day I moved out, Richard was at work. I left him a note, explaining that I needed space and time to think about our future. It was the most difficult thing I had ever done, but as I closed the door to our house for the last time, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I was alone, but for the first time in a long time, I felt free. The first few nights in my new apartment were filled with a mix of emotions. The quiet was both unsettling and liberating. I missed the familiarity of my old home, but I relished the freedom of my new space. This small apartment was a blank canvas, a place where I could start painting a new chapter in my life. As I unpacked my belongings, each item evoked a memory, a piece of the life I had shared with Richard. Some brought smiles, others tears. But with each box I emptied, I felt lighter, as if shedding the weight of years of unacknowledged feelings and unmet needs. The following week at work, my colleagues noticed the change in me. "You seem different, Elizabeth," one of them commented. "Lighter, somehow." I smiled, realizing that the decision to leave had not only changed my living situation, but had also started to change me. "I guess I am," I replied. Richard's reaction to my departure was a mix of confusion and frustration. He called several times, leaving messages that ranged from pleading to angry. I listened to each one, my resolve strengthening with his every word. One evening he showed up at my office, unannounced. "Elizabeth, we need to talk," he said, his face a picture of bewilderment and concern. I agreed to talk, but on my terms. We met at a nearby cafe, a neutral space where I felt more in control. "Why did you leave?" Richard asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. "I needed space, Richard," I replied calmly. "Space to think, to breathe, to be myself." He struggled to understand, his mind still entangled in the obligations to his sister and niece. "But we're a family," he insisted. "You can't just walk away from that." I shook my head. "A family should be a partnership, Richard. It's about mutual respect and understanding. I haven't felt that in a long time." Our conversation circled, with Richard trying to persuade me to return and me standing firm in my decision. It was clear that we were at an impasse, our paths diverging after years of walking side by side. After we parted ways, I walked back to my apartment, feeling a sense of peace. The conversation had confirmed that I had made the right decision. For the first time in years, I was choosing myself, my happiness. The days turned into weeks, and slowly, my new apartment began to feel like home. I decorated it with things that brought me joy, colors that lifted my spirits, and pictures that reflected my journey. I also started to explore new interests, joining a local book club and signing up for a pottery class. These activities brought new people into my life, people who knew me as Elizabeth, not as Richard's wife. I was rediscovering parts of myself that I had long forgotten or neglected. In this newfound freedom, I also found the courage to reflect on my marriage. I acknowledged the good times we had shared, but I also faced the painful truth of how unbalanced it had become. It was a bittersweet realization, but it was essential for my growth. As I lay in bed one night, listening to the soft hum of the city outside my window, I felt a profound sense of gratitude, grateful for the courage to make a change, grateful for the lessons learned, and most of all, grateful for the chance to rediscover myself. The autonomy of living on my own brought a clarity I hadn't realized I was missing. Each day, I grew more comfortable with my decision, feeling more like the protagonist in my life story, rather than a supporting character in someone else's. However, this new chapter was not without its challenges. A couple of months into my solo journey, I received a call that would once again shift the course of my life. It was from a private investigator I had discreetly hired after moving out, prompted by a nagging suspicion about Richard's increasingly odd behavior and absences. The investigator's findings were a harsh blow. Richard had been having an affair. The revelation was both shocking and oddly liberating. It explained so much of his recent behavior, the distance, the preoccupation. The pieces of a puzzle I didn't know I was assembling suddenly fell into place. Armed with this information, I confronted Richard. He was stunned, unprepared for my newfound assertiveness and the evidence I presented. His apologies and excuses fell on deaf ears. The betrayal was the final nail in the coffin of our marriage. I initiated the divorce proceedings, a process that was both painful and empowering. The legalities were complex, but I navigated them with a newfound resolve, fueled by the desire to close this chapter of my life. Richard's reaction to the divorce ranged from disbelief to anger, and finally, the revelation of his affair had consequences beyond our marriage. It affected his reputation, his relationships with friends and family, and most significantly, his relationship with Eleanor and Sophie. Eleanor and Sophie's reaction to the news was a mixture of shock and denial. They had placed Richard on a pedestal, and the revelation that he was capable of such deception shattered their image of him. As the divorce finalized, I found myself on the other side of a journey I never expected to take. I was now a single woman, with a past that was a mix of fond memories and painful lessons. But more importantly, I was a woman who had found her voice, her strength, and her independence. The settlement from the divorce, including alimony, was fair but hardly a windfall. It was not about the money, it was about the acknowledgement of my worth and the years I had invested in a marriage that ultimately failed me. Post-divorce, Richard's life took a downturn. His affair had not only cost him his marriage, but also his reputation. The ripple effects were evident in his professional life, and soon he left his job. For me, life after divorce was about rediscovery. I continued exploring new hobbies and interests, building a network of friends who valued me for who I was, not for my marital status or who I was married to. The freedom of this new life was exhilarating. I traveled, I read, I created. I lived on my terms, with no apologies or excuses. The world, once so narrow and confined, now seemed vast and full of possibilities. As I settled into my new normal, I realized that the end of my marriage was not just an ending, but also a beginning of a life where I was the author, where each day was a blank page waiting to be filled with my story, written in my words. Life has a way of testing you, offering lessons wrapped in unexpected envelopes. Just when I thought I had severed all ties with my past, it came knocking on my door in the form of Eleanor and Sophie. I received a message from Sophie, now a young adult, her tone desperate. "Aunt Elizabeth, we need your help. Things have been really tough since you left." I paused upon reading it, a whirlwind of emotions overtaking me. Part of me felt obliged to respond, to offer some assistance, but another part, the part that had fought so hard to establish boundaries and to gain self-respect, resisted. It took some time and self-reflection, but I decided not to reply to Sophie's message. This was their battle to fight, not mine. I had already spent too many years sacrificing my own well-being for the sake of Richard and his family. Eleanor also reached out, her voice laced with the same haughty tone that had always made me bristle. "Elizabeth, we're in a real bind here. I never thought I'd have to ask, but we need financial help." I could hardly believe it. After everything that had transpired, Eleanor still expected me to come to their rescue. It was a stark reminder of the dynamic that had existed in our relationships for all those years. My decision stood firm. "Eleanor, I wish you and Sophie well, but I cannot help you," I said as calmly as I could. There was silence on the line, followed by a string of accusations and insults, reminiscent of so many past conversations. I ended the call and blocked their numbers, severing the last threads of a bond that had brought me little but pain and diminishment. My heart raced with a mixture of guilt and empowerment, signaling the end of an era. At that moment, I knew I had truly turned a page. I felt a complete detachment from the life I once knew, a life where I was unseen and unheard. That night, as I lay in bed, I considered the full weight of the step I had taken. There was a profound sense of finality in my refusal, a clear line drawn between my past and my present. In the silence of my apartment, I pondered the journey that had led me to this point. There was a haunting loneliness in recognizing that I was now entirely on my own, that the family I had once been part of, for better or worse, was now nothing but a part of my history. Yet, with the loneliness came a powerful realization of my strength and independence. I no longer needed the approval or validation of others to feel worthy. I was my own person, standing on my own ground, guided by my own principles and desires. The next morning I awoke with a newfound sense of peace. I had faced my past head-on, and in doing so, I had found a deeper sense of self. It was a freedom born not just from my new life, but from the recognition of my inner resilience and the courage to uphold my boundaries. The dawn of each new day greeted me with a promise, a whisper of the untold possibilities that lay ahead. My journey, marked by turmoil and triumph, had led me to embrace solitude, not as a burden but as a companion. With each sunrise, I grew more attuned to the rhythms of my own heart, my life now a melody composed of my choices and desires. In the solitude of my new chapter, I sought a friend, a non-judgmental companion to share the quiet moments that bookended my days of self-discovery. The idea of adopting a dog began as a whisper in my mind, a gentle nudge that grew louder with time. One brisk Saturday morning, I walked into the local animal shelter, a sense of mission guiding my steps. The cacophony of barks and whimpers could have been overwhelming, but instead, it felt like a chorus of hope of second chances. My gaze met a pair of soulful brown eyes belonging to a middle-aged beagle mix with an earnest expression. He wagged his tail tentatively, as if unsure of his place in the world, much like I had been. It was a connection that needed no words. I knew he was the one. I named him Max, and together we embarked on the next leg of our journey, both of us seeking love and acceptance in a new beginning. In the company of Max, my home, once a silent space, filled with the soft patter of paws and the comforting presence of another beating heart. Our walks became a meditative ritual, a time to reflect on the path traveled and to revel in the simple joy of being alive, of being free. Looking back, the road I had traveled seemed intricately woven with pain and purpose. I often pondered on the lessons learned, the tears shed, and the laughter echoed in the corridors of time. Above all, I had learned the paramount importance of self-care and independence, the foundations upon which my new life was built. Freedom had been a costly pursuit, both emotionally and financially, but its rewards were immeasurable. I no longer saw myself through the lens of others, but rather through my own understanding of who I was and who I wanted to be. Some nights, Max and I would sit by the window, watching the stars twinkle in the vast canvas of the sky. In those moments of quiet companionship, I realized that while the future was unwritten, I approached it not with trepidation, but with curiosity and a sense of adventure. I had indeed come a long way, from the unacknowledged partner to a woman of resilience and substance. My journey bore witness to the metamorphosis of a soul from the shackles of neglect to the wings of autonomy. As I pen down these final words, the chapter of my rebirth draws to a close. Yet, the story of Elizabeth Martin is far from over. With Max by my side and a heart open to life's infinite tapestry, I step forward, a weaver of my own destiny. My name is Elena, a 23-year-old college senior with sights set firmly on becoming a journalist. But today, instead of celebrating my pending graduation, I'm trapped in a nightmare that's all too real. Barely 24 hours have passed since we buried my dad, Martin. He was the kind of father who managed to make me feel loved despite always being halfway across the world on business. The house feels emptier without him, a silent testament to the void his passing has left. As I stand in the foyer, still numb from the funeral, my mother Claudia and sister Victoria waste no time in announcing their plans. Their words ring in my ears like the tolling of a bell, a funeral knell for any lingering sense of family unity. "We're going to sell this house," Claudia says, the cold glint in her eye betraying her feigned solemnity. "Start looking for a new place, Elena. You better be out soon." I can hardly believe what I'm hearing. Before I can process the loss of my dad, they're already thinking about money and what they can gain from his death. It feels like a betrayal too large to comprehend. "You don't think you're entitled to anything, do you?" Victoria taunts, her boyfriend John chuckling beside her. Their cruel amusement makes my blood boil. I shouldn't be hearing these words, not at this moment when the pain is so raw. I never understood their greed, their obsession with wealth and appearances. I was the family outcast, too serious, too studious. Elena the dreamer, they'd mock. And now, faced with their scheming, all the years of indifference and mockery come to a head. "You're the worst," I cry out, unable to rein in my anger. "I'm done with this. I'm done with all of you." The bell rings, punctuating my outburst. Irritated at the interruption, I wipe away angry tears and swing the door open. A man in a dark suit stands before me, a briefcase in hand, his face striking a chord of vague recognition. "My condolences," he says solemnly. "May I come in?" Who is this stranger with a tone so grave, appearing at the most unexpected time? I'm not ready to deal with anyone else, not now. But something in his gaze tells me this isn't a mere courtesy visit. I step aside and let him enter, wondering what this could possibly mean for the fragile remnants of our broken family. The echo of my father's laughter once filled the hallways of our home, a balm to the sting of my mother and sister's sharper tones. Now those walls seem to press in on me, the memories of their hurtful words blending with the emptiness his absence has wrought. I'd always sought solace in my studies, believing that someday those books would lead me to a life of purpose, free from the shallow desires that drove Claudia and Victoria. But as I sit at the dining table, it's hard to focus on anything but the void Martin's passing left behind. Silent meals had become a new norm since Dad got sick and then passed away. Victoria would be on her phone, and Claudia would flip through high-fashion magazines, their detachment from our reality stark and unyielding. Their latest plan to dispose of our home and leave me behind hammered the final nail in the coffin of our family bonds. They seemed so eager to chase their fantasies of luxury condos and designer lives that nothing else mattered. Dad had been our anchor, and I'd expected at least a pretense of unity after he was gone. But now, faced with their naked opportunism, the lie of family was exposed, and something inside me snapped. Tired of being the outsider, the one who cared, I was ready to walk away from it all. Adrift in these thoughts, the doorbell rings, a sound I now associate with disruption and unwelcome news. At the door stands a man from my father's past, someone whose connections to our family had faded over time. "Good evening," he greets me. "I need to speak with you about your father's affairs." His solemn tone carries a formality that seems out of place in our disheveled living room, now a stark reminder of our discordant family. I nod, gesturing for him to sit down. Claudia and Victoria peek from the kitchen, their curious faces pinched with irritation. The man pulls out a stack of papers from his briefcase, his expression grim. "I'm Mr. Adams, your father's attorney. He entrusted me with his will and some final instructions," he explains as he adjusts his glasses, preparing to deliver news that feels poised to shake the foundations of our already crumbling household. Claudia leans in, her interest piqued. Victoria tries to look uninterested, yet hovers close by. As Mr. Adams begins to speak, I brace myself for what's to come, unsure of the consequences, but certain that our family dynamics are about to change once again. The room seems to contract with tension as Mr. Adams clears his throat, unfolding the document that held the final wishes of Martin, my father. Claudia and Victoria perched on the edge of their seats, their eyes betraying a keenness they'd struggled to mask since we lost him. "In accordance with your father's requests," Mr. Adams starts, "I am here to read the will and begin the process of executing his instructions." He looks around at each of us, perhaps gauging our readiness for what he's about to divulge. I can't help but feel a sense of dread. Growing up in the shadow of my mother and sister's expectations had taught me to expect little, to brace for disappointment. Yet, as the attorney's words begin to flow, it's evident that our expectations are about to be overturned. To my daughter Elena, I leave the entirety of my estate, including the family home and all accumulated savings and investments. The room falls silent, but for the rustling of paper and the distant ticking of the grandfather clock. Mr. Adams continues to read, but I barely register his words. All I can hear is the thundering beat of my heart and a kind of ringing in my ears. It can't be right. There must be some mistake. Me? I finally managed to stammer, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears. "But why?" Victoria's chair scrapes violently against the floor as she stands, her eyes widening in a mix of shock and fury. Claudia, similarly stunned, remains seated, her mouth opening and closing soundlessly. John, who had until now hovered quietly in the background, steps forward as if to protect or perhaps restrain Victoria. "This is some kind of joke, right?" he demands, but Mr. Adams simply offers a somber shake of his head. "There's no error," he assures us. Martin was very specific in his directive. He believed that Elena, with her convictions and work ethic, would best honor his legacy and manage his assets responsibly. Claudia finds her voice as disbelief gives way to anger. But what of us? She snaps. Her mother and sister? Are we to be left with nothing while she takes everything? The question hangs in the air, a palpable cloud of resentment radiating from my mother and sister. I'm at a loss for words, torn between the immense responsibility thrust upon me and the sting of their evident greed. Mr. Adams meets my gaze. Martin had his reasons, which he believed would be understood in time. For now, we must discuss the next steps and the details of the estate. As he talks, I can't help but wonder what my father saw in me, what faith he had placed in my hands, and how I could ever hope to fulfill it amidst the ruins of our family unity. The silence after Mr. Adams's revelation feels almost as heavy as the sadness that gripped me during my father's funeral. Claudia and Victoria's outrage fills the room, crashing against my shock like waves against a cliff. For a moment, no one speaks. We're trapped in a standstill, the implications of my father's will cutting through the air like a cold wind. My reasons, Mr. Adams finally continues, looking directly at me, were detailed in a personal letter left to me by your father for you, Elena. I'm to give it to you after the reading of the will. Victoria's voice breaks the spell, but there must be some mistake. I mean, she can't just get everything. Her words ricochet off the walls, heralding a battle I have no desire to fight. John puts a restraining hand on her shoulder, but it does nothing to dampen her spirit. And what about us? What are we, strangers, he decided to discard after everything we've done for him? She seizes upon the words like a weapon, her voice rising to a crescendo of disbelief. Claudia's mask of shock peels away, revealing the anger beneath. Exactly, there must be some provision for this, some oversight or option for dispute. This is preposterous. Her hands grip the arms of her chair, knuckles whitening. I finally find my voice, feeble though it sounds even to my ears. I don't understand. Why would Dad do this? What was he thinking? My mind races with unanswered questions, all pointing to a man I realized I may never have truly known. Mr. Ray. Adams removes his glasses, pinching the bridge of his nose before responding. Martin had his reasons, and he wanted you to know them. But in his own words. As for Claudia and Victoria, he turns to address them, you may contest the will if you wish, though Martin's instructions were explicit, and his sound mind, when drafting it, is well documented. The room falls into chaos once more. Voices clash as Claudia and Victoria express their anger and confusion, scrambling for a plan of action. I barely hear them. My thoughts are with the unopened letter, a final message from my father that burns a hole in the table where it lies. Taking a deep breath, I reach for the letter. The paper feels both insubstantial and as heavy as lead in my hands. Unfolding the creases, I prepare to read the words of a man who chose to speak from beyond the grave rather than in life, a man who has now left me an inheritance that feels more like a chalice of poison than a cup of blessings. Alone in my room, with the door securely closed, I unfolded the letter with trembling hands. Each crease seemed to hold a whisper of my father's voice. And as the written words appeared, I braced myself for the understanding that was about to come. Dearest Elena, it began in my father's familiar script. As you read this, I am sorry that I am not there to tell you these things in person. Sorry that I am leaving you with a burden that a parent should never bestow on their child. His apology, sincere and immediate, cut through the complexities of legal jargon and blunt revelations that had filled the air just moments ago. I inhaled deeply, the scent of ink on paper somewhat comforting. Your strength, your discipline, and your vision for a better world have never been invisible to me. In you, I saw the promise of a future that embraced honesty and integrity, far from the grasping hands of greed. The letter trembled in my hands, not from a breeze through the old window pane, but from the wellspring of emotions it unleashed. My eyes continued down the page. Elena, I've not been blind to the ways of our household. Your patience and hard work in the face of neglect by your mother and sister have been both my heartache and my pride. Giving you the entirety of my estate is my way of reconciling with the unfair responsibilities you've been forced to shoulder. Each sentence wove a tapestry of my father's unspoken observations and quiet support. The man who seemed a distant provider had been watching all along, understanding more than he let on. My only hope is that this inheritance will provide the freedom and the means for you to fulfill those aspirations that burn so brightly within you. Do not feel confined to fix what was broken long before you could make a difference. Live the life you deserve, my Elena. I folded the letter, pressing it against my chest, feeling the ink-etched love of a father who had seen his daughter's unassuming sacrifices. A wave of determination swept through me, mixed with the grief that had trailed me like a shadow since his passing. Leaving the safety of my room, I stepped back into the storm that was my fractured family. Mr. Adams glanced up as I entered, a silent question in his gaze. Claudia's glare was sharp, fixated on me, and Victoria was pacing like a caged animal, her earlier rage turned desperate. "It's time to talk about what happens next," I said, my voice firmer than I felt. Claudia scoffed. "What happens next is that we challenge this farce." Victoria nodded vehemently. "You won't get away with this, Elena. We deserve our share." Mr. Adams interjected. "Any legal challenge will be a lengthy and costly process with no guaranteed outcome. Martin's will is clear and well within his rights to enforce." With my father's words burning a hole in my pocket, I faced them, the family that had never truly been a family. It wasn't my decision, but it was his, and I intend to honor it. Tension wrapped chains around us all, but amid the chaos, one truth held steadfast. I would carry out my duty, uphold my father's wishes, and through them, perhaps find my own path to a better world. In the following days, the house became a war zone of oppressively silent mornings and thunderous arguments. Victoria and Claudia scoured legal forums and consulted with lawyers, desperately seeking a loophole to contest the will. They clung to the belief that they were entitled to Martin's legacy, viewing it as their rightful due rather than the gift of a man's life work. Despite their efforts, Mr. Adams remained unflappable, a steady pillar amid the tempest. His calm demeanor was a source of comfort as we navigated the uncharted waters of estate settlement. "The will is airtight, Elena," he assured me once again over cups of tepid coffee in the formal dining room. "You need not worry about their threats." Yet even with his reassurances, guilt gnawed at me. Was it right to accept everything, while my mother and sister got nothing? The logical part of my brain reminded me that my father had his reasons, but my heart couldn't shake the residual familial obligation, a desire to mend what was broken, even when I knew it was beyond repair. I spent my days preparing for the inevitable legal challenges and familiarizing myself with Martin's finances. The responsibility was daunting, running the numbers, making decisions about property and investments I never knew existed. Each step felt like wading through fog, but I was determined to see it through, to build on the small beacon of trust my father had left me. It was during these sessions of poring over financial statements that my mind would wander to the life awaiting beyond these walls, how to use this inheritance to forge a path aligned with my own values, how I could make a lasting impact. Amid the chaos, Claudia and Victoria grew increasingly agitated, their true colors seeping out in bursts of pettiness and spite. In an impulsive display, Victoria claimed sentimental family heirlooms, while Claudia hinted at dark secrets that could tarnish Martin's name. Their insinuations aimed to wound, to shake my resolve, but I had become adept at navigating their emotional minefields. One particularly tense evening, the air thick with unsaid threats and frigid stares, I reached my breaking point. "Enough," I said, the single word slicing through the tension. 3 pairs of eyes fixed on me, uncertain, wary. "I can't give you what Dad didn't leave for you, but what I can do is help you start over somewhere else." Their shock was palpable, an abrupt shift in the dynamic they had been fueling. "It won't be a life of luxury, but it will be a fresh start." Claudia's laughter was sharp, humorless. "A concession prize from our dearest Elena. How magnanimous." Her sarcasm was a familiar sting, but it glanced off the armor years of antagonism had helped me forge. I stood firm, despite the bitterness that clawed at the air between us. "It's not a prize. It's a choice. Take it or leave it. But understand this. I am moving forward, with or without your acceptance." Their response was a symphony of silence and begrudging nods, a tenuous agreement forged at the crossroads of greed and survival. As I retreated to my room, the letter's weight in my pocket reminded me of the journey ahead, one where I'd navigate not only the inheritance, but also who I would become as a consequence of it. The days turned into weeks as my life became a routine of meetings with Mr. Adams and navigating the complex process of realizing my inheritance. Claudia and Victoria, having reluctantly accepted my offer, began their search for a more modest place to call home. The atmosphere grew less contentious, though the air still held a chill that went beyond the coming of winter. It was a time of paradoxical solitude amidst the chaos. The house felt larger and more desolate with each packed box and removed piece of furniture. I found temporary solace in my father's study, which remained untouched, a capsule of the past that echoed with a time when family strife was just a faint undercurrent beneath the surface of our daily lives. The day finally came when Claudia and Victoria left the house for the last time. With the sign of a check and a curt farewell, they were gone, taking with them remnants of a life that was forever changed. Standing in the doorway, I watched as their car disappeared around the bend, feeling an unsettling mixture of relief and sorrow. It was time to look to the future. With Mr. Adams' help, I set up a charitable foundation in my father's name, dedicated to fostering educational opportunities for young underprivileged students like the younger version of myself, who once believed her dreams were unattainable within the confines of a home that didn't understand her aspirations. I enrolled in graduate school, pursuing a program in journalism that would put me on the path to the career I'd always envisioned. As I worked towards my master's degree, I used the network my father had left behind, along with the resources now at my disposal, to intern at a prominent newspaper. My life was busier than I ever imagined, filled with the pursuit of stories and justice, just like I discussed with my father on those long-distance calls that now felt like a lifetime ago. These days, I'm always on the go, carrying with me the principles that he instilled in me. The house, once a cage of sorts, began to feel more like a home as I made it my own. I repainted walls, rearranged furniture, and even adopted a rescue dog, a joyful presence that filled the emptiness with barks and boundless energy. The rooms that had once witnessed family feuds now opened up to friends, colleagues, and laughter. Sometimes I'd find myself in my father's study, poring over his old letters and the faded pages of his books. My eyes would linger on the signature at the bottom of his letter, the final message that had altered the course of my life. "Duty and love," he wrote, "are the strongest forces we wield. Use them well." And in those quiet moments, surrounded by the legacy of words and wisdom that my father left behind, I'd whisper a promise to do just that. I hesitated for just a second before picking up the phone, already bracing myself for another unpleasant exchange. Paul often called me at the worst possible times, but this time was different. The lines of worry etched across my face deepened as I answered. "What is it now, Paul?" "I hate to break it to you, but my girlfriend is pregnant." His voice was flat, emotionless. "She's 18 years younger than me. I guess what I'm saying is, I'm leaving you, Anna." "Getting a divorce. That's cool with you, right?" I gripped the phone tighter, the edges digging into my palm. My other hand involuntarily clenched into a fist, an outward display of the inner turmoil I was struggling to suppress. After years of tension and disappointment, I should have been prepared for something like this. But the sheer audacity of his request left me momentarily speechless. Before I could formulate a response, my thoughts were interrupted by a more pressing concern: the well-being of our son, or rather my stepson, Sam. At 16, he would be far from oblivious to the goings-on in our suddenly fractured household. He had always been a sensitive kid, finely attuned to the fault lines of our family. As if on cue, a soft knocking came from the door of the study, the only room I considered mine in the sprawling house that Paul and I shared. "Mom, is everything all right?" It was Sam's voice, tinged with the worry that I had come to recognize all too well. Momentarily neglecting Paul, who was still droning on about something or another, I softened my voice and replied, "I'll be out in a minute, sweetie. Just wrapping up a call." Turning back to the matter at hand, I found my voice. "Listen, Paul, we'll discuss the divorce later. What's most important now is Samantha. If we're going through with this, you need to take responsibility for him. For now, please just let this settle before you do anything else rash." There was a pause on the other end, and then an exasperated sigh. "Anna, don't start with this. He's your kid too." Technically, he was right, but the unpleasant truth, and perhaps my most powerful card, was still tucked tightly against my chest, a reminder of the complex emotional and legal dynamics that had bound our little family together. The silence on my end seemed to unnerve him, and he blurted out, "You know what? Fine, we'll talk about this later." And with that, he hung up. Releasing a sigh I hadn't realized I was holding, I placed the phone down and pinched the bridge of my nose, an ineffectual attempt to fend off the headache brewing just beneath the surface. Sam was waiting just outside the door when I emerged, his eyes searching mine for an explanation I wasn't yet ready to provide. I mustered a reassuring smile and looped an arm around his shoulders, guiding him back to the living room. "Let's not worry about that call," I said, although we both knew that was a near impossibility. "Why don't you tell me about your day instead?" And as he launched into a story about his latest project in art class, I clung to the normalcy of our conversation like a lifeline, knowing full well that the storm clouds were gathering just beyond the horizon. That night, as the house lay quiet and shadows played against the walls from the street lamps outside, my mind began to drift back in time. The memories came unbidden, a cascade of moments revealing a completely different version of the man I had married. I settled into my armchair, a relic from my pre-Paul days, and let the past unravel itself. I was 27 when I met Paul, an independent marketing expert with a penchant for brand revival. He came to me as a client, but soon became more. We were both rebounding from past relationships. Mine was a tale of young love that burned out too brightly, and his was a marriage wrecked by infidelity. It didn't take long for Paul to sweep me into a whirlwind romance, complete with tender looks and promises of always putting family first. His son, whom he had full custody of, was named Sam. At the tender age of 3, the boy had a mop of curly hair and eyes so wide they seemed to swallow the world around him. Paul would bring him along on our dates, saying, "Just until we find a good sitter." But as time went by, it became an unspoken arrangement, one that didn't bother me as much as I thought it might. Despite my initial reservations, there were fleeting moments where our trio felt like a glimpse of the family life I'd never known I wanted. It was both cozy and exciting, and I began to think that perhaps I could step into this role that the universe had seemingly carved out just for me. So when Paul proposed a year into our relationship, presenting not only a ring but a family unit, I said yes, with hardly a second thought. But the rosy glow of new marriage faded with startling rapidity. As soon as our honeymoon was over, literally and metaphorically, the real Paul began to surface. His facade of a doting father cracked and fell away, leaving behind a man who seemed increasingly indifferent to his son's existence. Work was always his convenient excuse. Even when the underlying note of sadness in Sam's voice couldn't be missed, Paul would shrug it off, leaving me to soothe away the sting of abandonment. I tried to voice my concerns, but Paul's temper flared up easily. "It's not your place," he would say, dismissing my attempts to navigate a healthy dynamic between father and son. As time wore on, I tried to be everything Sam needed, steadfast and present, unlike his father. I attended school plays alone, cheering twice as loud to make up for the space where Paul should have been. And with every small absence, with every unkept promise, a bitter seed of resentment took root in my heart. Now, in the subdued light of my living room, as sleep teased at the edges of my consciousness, I couldn't help but wonder when exactly my marriage had slipped from being a partnership to a performance, and at what point I had lost myself in this charade of family life. The morning sun filtered through the blinds, casting lines of light and shadow across my face. I took a moment to steel myself for whatever trials the day might bring, after last night's revelations. The silence of the house was a stark contrast to the chaos of my thoughts. Sam was still asleep, his door ajar and his breathing steady. I let out a quiet sigh of relief that he could at least find some peace during these turbulent times. The urge to protect him from the incoming storm was visceral, but I could not hide forever behind a facade of calm domesticity. Hesitantly, I revisited the idea of returning to work, part-time at least. It wasn't just about the money, although our family's financial future was uncertain with the looming divorce. It was about regaining a semblance of the independence I had once taken for granted. I remembered my conversation with Paul about this a few years back. A part-time job? Paul had scoffed, slouched on the couch with a beer in hand. What's that for? Some pocket money for shopping? His laughter still echoed in my mind, a bitter reminder of his condescension. It's for Sam, I had shot back, my voice firm. He's growing up, and there are expenses, school supplies, extracurricular activities, and I want to help. Paul's only response had been a shrug before he dimmed the room with the TV's glow. But the next morning, when his head was clearer, he had grudgingly agreed, tossing the declaration at me like it was a breadcrumb. And so I slipped back into a familiar role in the marketing world, but on my own terms. My former boss had welcomed me back with open arms, aware of the tumultuous tide I was navigating at home. The balancing act was taxing, juggling domestic duties with the demands of work, but it provided a lifeline. A reminder that I was more than just someone's cast-off wife. It felt invigorating to reclaim a piece of my identity. That liberation was cut short one evening when my work commitments saw me arriving home later than usual to find Paul pacing in the foyer, a snarl twisting his lips. "Where have you been?" he demanded. "I was at my part-time job," I replied, weary and not in the mood for another confrontation. "Meeting some man, right?" He seized my arm, his fingers biting into my skin. "Is that it, Anna? Tell me!" The absurd accusation struck me like a slap. Paul's distrust was a grotesque mirror that reflected his infidelities, not mine. I wrenched my arm away from his grip, denial falling from my lips in heated, vehement waves. But Paul, never one to back down, demanded to see my phone, to delve into the intricacies of a life he so often shunned. I watched frozen as he dialed my boss's number, that single action shattering any facade of trust we might have still shared. I could have drowned in the silence that followed my boss's clear-cut clarification. Paul's lame attempt at an excuse was nothing more than a shrug and a suggestion that I should have been more careful, if only to save him the embarrassment. Since then, my days were colored with a rising dread of future altercations, a dread that had seeped steadily into my heart, setting up residence alongside the growing hollow of my love for Paul. Now, as I sat upright in my armchair, a cup of cold coffee abandoned on the table before me, the inevitability of our situation settled heavily upon my shoulders. We were past the point of repair. The notion of us existed now only in the fragmented memories of a time when I believed in the possibility of a happy ending. As the days slipped by in an unsettled quiet, life took on a stuttering rhythm. I tried to protect Sam from the growing tensions while I navigated the minefield that my marriage had become. I felt a cold knot at the pit of my stomach every time I caught sight of Paul's car parked outside, his comings and goings now as erratic as his moods. One afternoon, my work took me near Paul's corporate office, a swanky high-rise that seemed to scrape the clouds. A familiar, prickling discomfort grew within me as I walked by. Even after all these years, I had never quite come to consider that towering glass monolith as a part of my world. It was Paul's territory, a place where I had little reason or desire to venture until now. As fate would have it, I caught sight of Paul's car parked across the street. There was a figure seated beside him, unmistakable by its youthfulness and the animated gestures that accompanied a fit of laughter between them. With a heavy heart, I realized this must be the younger girlfriend, the one carrying his child. My hands shook with a volatile mix of anger and anxiety as I snapped a picture. I didn't know what I intended to do with it, but the private investigator my friend had mentioned once seemed like a good place to start. Secrecy wasn't something with which I was comfortable, yet the situation seemed to call for it. As the evidence of Paul's duplicity gathered in the hands of the PI, a morbid sense of satisfaction intermingled with my pain. It was ironic how the truth often surfaces when one starts digging in the right places. At home, Sam's obliviousness was a mercy and a curse. The moments we shared, him asking for help with his college applications or discussing his art projects, were pockets of normalcy that kept me anchored. Yet the looming specter of the truth felt heavier by the day. How long could I keep this all from him, and when the time came, how would he view his father or me? Paul seemed oblivious to the undercurrents, too consumed by his extramarital escapades to notice, or perhaps he simply didn't care. Our interactions were stilted, and more often than not, he wore an expression of annoyance that would crescendo into aggression if pressed. It was during one of these strained conversations that the dam finally broke. Clutching the preliminary report from the PI, I let my gaze harden when I addressed him. "I don't know which is worse," I started, the frost in my voice matching the icy glare I fixed on him. "The fact that you're cheating, or that you were so sloppy about hiding it." Paul's reaction was a bizarre blend of shock and defiance. "What are you talking about, Anna?" "I'm talking about your barely legal mistress and the baby that you claim is yours." I pushed the paper across the table, watching as his eyes darted over the incriminating photos and the sterile, typed-up accounts of his infidelity. The room went dead silent for a second too long before I eventually added, "You're going to need to take better care of Sam. He's your responsibility, Paul." "You can't mean that," Paul retorted weakly. "What about everything we've been through?" I mustered the full force of my resolve when I addressed him, the cut of betrayal slicing through each word. "Because, Paul, as much as I love Sam, I've never legally adopted him. He's not my child, he's yours with your ex-wife." Paul's stunned silence was answer enough. The truth hung between us an unscalable wall. It was a final acknowledgement of a relationship that had been fraying at the seams long before his affair. In the quiet aftermath, I slipped silently out of the room and made my way to the one place I now considered an asylum, Sam's room. His earnest smile and oblivious chatter were the only consolation I had left in the ever-complicating mess of my married life. Sitting at the kitchen table the next morning, I sipped my tea, staring at the steam curling upwards like wistful spirits seeking escape from their liquid confines. The house was too quiet, the kind of silence that seems to press against your ears, a silence ripe with words not yet spoken, truths not yet revealed. There was a knock at the door, solemn and perfunctory. It was Paul, his face a grim mask of confrontation, his jaw twitching with pent-up frustration. In tow was Emma, the young woman whose involvement with my husband had upended my life. Her belly was now showing the early signs of pregnancy, and she moved with the tentative touch of someone navigating new terrain. "Anna," Paul began, "we need to talk." The frigid air between us crackled with tension as I remained silent, nodding slightly for him to continue. With hesitant boldness, Emma spoke up. "I've heard a lot about you. And Sam. He's a good kid, right? You've been parenting him for over a decade." "Indeed," I replied coolly. "Sam is a remarkable young man." "Then why abandon him now?" Emma's voice wavered slightly, betraying her underlying apprehension. The question stung, but I kept my composure. "It's not a matter of want, Emma. Legally speaking, he is not my child." I could see the confusion in her eyes, her furtive glances at Paul searching for reassurance or explanation. Paul, seemingly prepared for a different outcome, appeared lost. "But we're married, Anna. Isn't that enough?" "No, it's not," I said firmly. "To make a stepchild one's own, one must legally adopt them. I never did." "Adoption?" Emma frowned, the concept foreign to her. "Exactly," I continued. "Without that, I have no claim over Sam, no obligations or rights." Paul's face paled. "What does this mean for us, then?" "It means you're fully responsible for Sam's upbringing. I am not abandoning him, but I cannot, in good legal conscience, take him with me. Your actions have consequences, Paul." There was a pause as the weight of my words settled over us like a shroud. "Look, this is a mess," I concluded, standing up. "I'm willing to discuss a fair divorce settlement, but Sam's care is not negotiable. He's your son." The conversation ended with Paul's defeatist surrender. Emma's protests were cut short by a simple, yet stern look. They left in a huff, the door closing behind them with a decisive click, the sound echoing the closing chapter of our marriage. It was only after their car was out of sight that I allowed myself a single solitary tear. My grief was not for the loss of Paul, already a ghost in my heart, but for the upheaval that Sam's life was about to undergo. I vowed then and there to protect him as much as I could, no matter the legal ties that bound or separated us. Days passed in a haze of legal consultations and muted emotions. I navigated through them with the determination of someone who knows there's no turning back. Every ring of the phone, every knock on the door, I was braced for another battle, another bitter exchange. In a strange turn of the tide, Paul's inevitable retaliation came not in the form of tantrums or threats, but with him dragging Emma into the sanctity of our home. The tension was thick, a tangible entity as they stood there, a united but unstable front. "Anna," Paul began, urgency bordering on desperation clouding his voice. "You can't just back out and let everything fall apart because our situation changed." I could only nod, urging him to continue while mentally preparing my counter-argument. I was not going to be swayed by emotional pleas or twisted logic. Emma, her arms protectively cradling her unborn future, found her voice amidst the unease. "Surely there's a way you can keep Sam. You were his mother for so long." Her words hung in the air, and I felt a pang of sympathy for her, caught in the crossfire of our crumbling marriage. "Emma, I did not abandon Sam. Paul did when he chose to pursue a relationship outside of our marriage. One cannot just discard responsibilities because it's inconvenient," I replied, my voice even but firm. "The legality of my relationship with Sam is clear. No formal adoption, no parental rights. It's always been that way." The confusion in Emma's eyes mirrored the same dawning realization I saw in Paul's. It was then I decided to divulge the final nail in their contrived coffin. I retrieved the folder containing the evidence of Emma's infidelity, the product of the private investigator's thorough work. Her breath hitched audibly as she scanned the photos and accompanying reports. "This child," I began, placing an incriminating photo of Emma with a man not Paul on the table. "It doesn't belong to you, does it, Paul?" Silence consumed the room as Paul's gaze fixated on the photograph, slowly twisting from confusion to anger. He rounded on Emma with glaring accusation. "Is this true?" His voice was barely above a whisper, but each word was laced with betrayal. Emma's stammered denial, negated by the evidence before her eyes, only fueled Paul's fury. You led me on." Paul's words were venomous, his expression an amalgam of rage and hurt. Observing the scene unfold with a detached, academic interest, I felt the chains of my marriage finally slacken. "Do what you must with each other. Sam and I will adapt, as we always have. I expect you'll do the same," I uttered with finality, excusing myself from the brewing storm. As I made my way to the haven of my study, their heated exchanges muffled by the closed door, I focused on the sound of my steady breaths and the knowledge that Sam and I would face brighter days ahead. It was not the end of our story, merely the beginning of a new chapter. In the wake of the crumbling illusions and the raw truths laid bare, my thoughts turned toward the future with a steely resolve. It was within the confines of my study, among the legal pads scribbled with thoughts and potential strategies, that I formulated my next steps. A decisive course of action was necessary, both for Sam's well-being and for my emancipation from the life I had known. I reached out to my attorney, a meticulous and forthright woman named Miss Carter, who had been a guardian angel of sorts throughout this ordeal. "It's time to discuss the terms of the divorce and the division of property," I told her over a secure line, each word a hammer driving nails into the coffin of my marriage. Miss Carter assured me she would arrange for us to move forward with pragmatic efficiency, and I trusted her implicitly. Preparing for this legal battle was like bracing for a storm. Security measures were a necessity, not a luxury. Within days, a meeting was orchestrated to discuss the partition of our lives into neatly quantifiable assets and liabilities. Paul's disposition fluctuated between anger and spiteful acquiescence. But through it all, I remained firmly anchored to my objectives. As if play-acting the part of the dutiful wife one last time, I served coffee and brought out the ledger of our once-shared existence, slipping into the uncomfortable but familiar role of his domestic partner. Trying to eke out my dignity from our divide was akin to navigating a boat through rocky shoals, each potential compromise on material possessions a risk that might capsize an already unstable situation. But Sam's future was the lighthouse guiding me. Everything I did was to ensure he would not be left adrift in the wake of our split. Paul hesitated, his expression a mask of consternation as we discussed alimony and the financial stipulations going forward. "How can we possibly unwind everything we've built?" he asked, a note of plea underlying his usual assertiveness. "We can, and we will," I assured him, my tone laced with an undercurrent of fatigue. "It's not just about us anymore." The air grew colder, the silence starker. as we both signed the papers that would render our shared history into nothing more than a transaction, an exchange of worldly goods and bruised promises. I hesitated only once, my pen hovering over the document as the finality of it all settled into my bones. Each stroke of my signature was a release, a liberation from the ties that no longer served me, or Sam. As Paul left, his departure was without the dramatic flourish of our past arguments. Instead, a quiet, anticlimactic exit that allowed the gentle closing of the door to serve as his final goodbye. Retreating to the solace of my solitude, I reflected on what it meant to let go, to relinquish the dreams of what could have been for the reality of what must be. In the quiet aftermath, a newfound sense of pride welled within me. I would steer my destiny with a steady hand, come what may. The jagged edge of reality set in as I sat at my vanity, staring into the mirror at the woman I had become. A woman hardened by betrayal, but not broken by it. With each brushstroke through my hair, I steeled myself for the confrontation to come. I was tired of the shadow games and half-truths. It was time to drag everything into the light. Donning my armor of a charcoal business suit that accentuated my newfound resolve, I arrived at Paul's place of work, a towering testament to his professional success and personal failures. Blending into the anonymous flow of the city's morning hustle, I passed through the revolving doors of his corporate fortress with one objective: to ensure there would be no further avoidance or delays in the settlement of our divorce. Paul's supervisor, Mr. Green, was a man I had met but a few times, always in the periphery of company galas and charitable events. His demeanor carried the gravity of someone who understood the weight of his position, and as I sat in the waiting area of his office, I folded my hands, ready to lay out my case. The door to Mr. Green's office opened, and Paul's figure appeared, confusion marring his otherwise stern features. He had clearly been interrupted, pulled from whatever business matters had occupied his day. I could sense his annoyance, but the burning urgency in my gaze was enough to silence whatever complaint he might have vocalized. Mr. Green extended his hand, a practiced smile affixed to his face as he addressed me. "Miss Simmons, what brings you to our office today?" I took a deep breath, framing my thoughts into coherent sentences. The matter at hand is personal, but it has reached a point where I can no longer wait for my soon-to-be ex-husband to do the right thing. Our divorce must proceed, and I need assurance he will cooperate. Paul stiffened, his eyes darting to Mr. Green, then back to me. It was clear he had never anticipated our private discord intersecting with his professional life. "Please understand, Mr. Green," I continued, "my visit here is not to scandalize or to seek retribution, but to move forward with transparency and closure." The air between us was charged, the hum of company operations outside Mr. Green's door now a distant murmur. I watched as Mr. Green considered my words, his expression morphing from one of cordiality to concern. "I assure you, Mr. Green," I finished, "that our personal grievances will not impact Paul's responsibilities here at the company. I am merely seeking resolution so we may both proceed with our lives." Paul's protests were interwoven with pleas for discretion, but the truth couldn't be simpler. We were beyond the point of secrets and saving face. With a nod, Mr. Green assured me he would encourage Paul's cooperation. The meeting adjourned with a heavy finality, leaving me to navigate my way back out into the bustle of the city. As I walked, the gravity of my actions began to sink in. I had walked into the lion's den unflinching, laying bare the truth to the powers that would most impact Paul's decision-making. It wasn't long before news of the scandal made its way through the office grapevine. Paul and Emma's illicit relationship, once shrouded in whispers, was now cast into the unforgiving light of day. Emma's position within the company, intertwined as it was with her personal entanglements, became unmanageable. The fallout was swift and irrevocable for both of them, their reputations tarnished and their professional standing compromised. I returned home to the quiet of my study, allowing myself the brief luxury of unraveled composure. The sky outside was overcast, heavy with unreleased rain, a mirror to my own emotional state. Paul and Emma's fate was no longer my concern. I had severed the ties that bound me to their downfall. It was time for me to focus on the path ahead, to embrace whatever came next, with eyes wide open and heart slowly mending. Now, with the anticipation of an uncertain future tingling at my fingertips, I prepared myself for the next chapter, one that I would author on my own terms. The following weeks brought a whirlwind of change and, unexpectedly, hope. I was offered a full-time position at the marketing firm where I had found solace in part-time work, a lifeline that became a vessel for transformation. Gripping the opportunity with both hands, I dove into the work I loved, allowing it to support and reshape the newfound life that Sam and I were building. Sam was navigating his own changes, adapting to the shifting landscape of our family structure with a maturity beyond his years. Discussions of college applications and plans for the future became our new anchor points as we forged ahead in unison. One evening, as the soft glow of the sunset bathed the living room in warmth, Sam approached me, hesitant yet excited. "Mom," he began, "there's someone I want you to meet. I'm seeing someone, and, well, I think you'll like her." His words touched a tender spot within me. Even as he spoke, he fidgeted with the hem of his shirt, a nervous habit he'd had since childhood. "Sam, I'd be delighted to meet her," I assured him, my heart swelling. "But are you sure you're okay with me being there? I mean, after everything." He stopped me with a look, a knowing, reassuring gaze. "Mom, no matter how things ended with Paul, you were always there for me. You're my family. I want you to be part of this." As we shared a warm embrace, I realized that our bonds were indeed stronger than I had ever dared to hope. Sam's resilience and love gave me the strength to be the parent he deserved, regardless of any legal definition. With the official divorce proceedings behind us, my life took on a different rhythm, one filled with promise and productivity. The undertow of loneliness that often accompanied my nights slowly ebbed away, replaced by a sense of peace and fulfillment. Sam's presence was a constant reminder of the continuity of love and care I had provided over the years. Our interactions became less about filling the gaps left by Paul and more about celebrating each milestone, each victory, no matter how small. The college acceptance letter arrived like a beacon of triumph, its crisp white envelope holding so much more than just words. Inside was validation of Sam's talent, determination, and the future he was destined to seize. As he read the contents aloud, his voice crackled with emotion, and I felt my own chest tighten with pride. My own eyes grew misty as he looked up at me, the joy in his face mirrored in my own smile. This was our victory, one made sweeter by the struggles we had overcome. Whatever lay ahead, I knew we would face it together, buoyed by the understanding that family is not merely defined by blood, but by the shared experiences and unconditional support that bonds us. And as Sam set his sights on the horizon, ready to embrace college life and all the challenges it would bring, I stood by, ready to support him as I had always promised, as I would always do. With each passing day, the woman I saw in the mirror grew stronger, surer, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, forged in the fire of adversity and emerging, triumphant and hopeful, into the light of a new beginning. Months melded into a new kind of normalcy, the raw wounds of the past now healing into scars, reminders of battles fought and strength earned. In the solitude of my revitalized life, news of Paul and Emma reached me only in fragments, echoes of the life I had left behind. Through conversations with Mr. Green, whom I had come to regard as an ally in the corporate world, I learned that the once cohesive front Paul and Emma had presented had crumbled into a spectacle of blame and acrimony. The affair, once shrouded in secrecy, was now a specter that haunted their professional and personal lives with equal persistence. Their relationship buckled under the weight of public scrutiny and personal betrayals. Without the security of established careers at Paul's company, they found themselves adrift in a sea of their own making. The court battle over Emma's claims of emotional abuse and her subsequent demands for compensation was a drawn-out affair, leaving them both exposed and vulnerable. In the end, it was not just their careers that suffered a fatal blow, but their relationship too. Emma, still pregnant and now shouldering the disdain of her family, retreated from the public eye and the ire of her once lover. Paul, meanwhile, found himself unemployed at an age where starting over was more of a challenge than a prospect. Reports suggested he eventually settled for a part-time position at a local store, a shadow of his former glory. As these whispers of their struggles reached me, I found myself reflecting not with malice, but with a somber acknowledgement of life's unpredictable tides. There was no joy in their downfall, only the quiet affirmation that every choice leads us down a path of our own making. For Sam and me, the path was one of growth and newfound harmony. As he embarked on his college journey, I watched him navigate his newfound independence with the same resilience and integrity that had seen him through the chaos of our fractured family life. It was a bittersweet farewell when I dropped him off at his dormitory, but one filled with the promise of his bright future. Back in the fortress of my own rebuilding, surrounded by the familiar comforts of a home that had seen too much yet stood resilient, my career flourished. Returning as a full-time employee had reignited a passion that I had thought lost, infusing my days with purpose and fulfillment. In moments of solitude, I would sometimes catch myself marveling at the strength and serenity that had grown from the ashes of my previous life. There was a newfound sense of self that permeated every aspect of my existence, a calm confidence that whispered assurances of the possibilities that lay ahead. In the evenings, when the golden glow of sunset bathed my garden in its warm embrace, I would think of Sam's parting words, that regardless of our lack of legal tie, I had always been and would always remain his true parent, in every sense that truly mattered. It was in these quiet moments that I knew the love and bonds we shared transcended all else. Our narrative had been one of trials and transformation, with the final pages yet to be written. Together and yet apart, we moved forward into our separate futures. A son stepping boldly into the world he would shape, and a mother standing proud, her resolve unshaken, ready for whatever chapters were yet to come.
The scent of rosemary and garlic filled my kitchen, a perfect harmony that had taken hours to achieve. I'd spent my entire Sunday preparing this roast, determined to make tonight's dinner special. Ryan deserved a proper celebration for his promotion, even if his mother insisted on joining us. I'm Camille, and until today I thought I knew exactly how to handle my mother-in-law's peculiarities. The sound of the front door opening made me tense. Linda's voice carried through the house before I could even see her. "Oh, Ryan, darling, I brought your favorite pot roast, the one you've loved since you were little." My fingers gripped the counter's edge. She wasn't supposed to arrive for another hour, and I definitely hadn't invited her to bring food. The click of her heels against the hardwood grew louder, each step a countdown to inevitable confrontation. "Something smells interesting in here," Linda announced, sweeping into my kitchen like she owned it. Her designer handbag swung from one arm, while the other clutched a ceramic dish to her chest. "I made Ryan's favorite," I said, forcing a smile. "Remember? We discussed this last week. I wanted to surprise him." Linda's perfectly lined lips curved into something between a smile and a sneer. "Did we? Must have slipped my mind." She set her dish on the counter and lifted the lid off mine. Her nose wrinkled. "Oh dear, is this supposed to be pot roast?" "It's braised beef with rosemary and garlic," I explained, though I knew it wouldn't matter. "Ryan mentioned loving it last time we had it at—" "Sweetheart," Linda cut in, already pulling on disposable gloves she'd produced from her purse. "My Ryan has very specific tastes. He's always been sensitive about his food. I don't think this will agree with him at all." Before I could stop her, she grabbed my roast, the one I'd spent hours preparing, and dropped it straight into the garbage. The thud of meat hitting the bottom of the bin echoed through the kitchen like a gunshot. "There. Now we can serve him something proper." She turned to her own dish, humming as if she hadn't just destroyed hours of my work. Ryan chose that moment to walk in, loosening his tie. "Something smells amazing, Mom." He kissed her cheek, then glanced at me. "Where's that roast you mentioned this morning, Cam?" "Your mother threw it away," I said flatly. "Oh, come on now," he laughed, as if I just told a joke. "Mom wouldn't do that." Linda patted his cheek. "Camille's just upset because her experiment didn't turn out right. You know how sensitive she can be about these things. Luckily, I brought your favorite." I watched Ryan's face, waiting for him to defend me, to question his mother's version of events. Instead, he grinned and reached for the serving spoon. "You're the best, Mom. Nobody makes pot roast like you do." Something snapped inside me then. Not loudly, not dramatically, but definitively, like a thread pulled too tight finally giving way. I'd spent 3 years trying to be the perfect wife, trying to navigate Linda's constant undermining with grace. But standing there, watching my husband eagerly dig into his mother's food while mine rotted in the garbage, I realized Grace wasn't going to cut it anymore. "I'm going out," I announced, grabbing my keys. "But dinner's ready," Ryan protested, his mouth already full. "Eat with your mother," I said, heading for the door. "You two deserve each other." As I walked out, I heard Linda's voice. "She's always been so dramatic, hasn't she? You really must learn to handle her better, darling." I got into my car and started driving, no destination in mind. But for the first time since I'd married Ryan, I felt something other than hurt or resignation. I felt rage, pure, clarifying rage. And underneath that rage was something even more dangerous, a plan beginning to take shape. I spent 3 hours driving that night, finally ending up at Alex's apartment. She took one look at my face and pulled me inside, already reaching for the wine. "You look like you've either committed murder or you're planning to," she said, pouring generously. "The night's still young." I accepted the glass, sinking into her couch. Linda threw my dinner in the garbage, right in front of me, and Ryan... My voice caught. He just laughed it off. Alex's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, then held it up. "Speaking of your husband, that's his 4th text asking where you are." "Let him worry." I took a long sip. "For once." "You need to start documenting this stuff," Alex said, grabbing her laptop. "Every incident, every text, every time she shows up unannounced. Trust me, you'll want a record." "For what? Divorce?" The word hung in the air, heavier than I'd expected. "For whatever comes next." She opened a new document. "Start talking." By midnight, we had 3 pages of incidents. Reading them laid out like that, clinical and chronological, made my stomach turn. It wasn't just tonight's dinner. It was 3 years of calculated humiliation. My phone lit up with another text, this time from Linda. "Ryan's very upset. A good wife wouldn't abandon her husband like this. Come home and we can discuss your behavior." "She's unbelievable," Alex muttered, reading over my shoulder. "What are you going to do?" Before I could answer, my phone rang. "Ryan." "Where are you?" His voice was tight. "Mom's worried sick." "Mom's worried?" I laughed. "That's rich." "Tell me, Ryan, did you even look in the garbage? Did you check to see if I was lying about what she did?" "Come on, Cam. You know how Mom gets. She just wants what's best for me." "And what about what's best for us? For our marriage?" Silence stretched between us. Then, "Maybe if you tried harder to understand her?" "I'm coming home," I cut him off. "But not tonight. I need space." "Space?" He sounded genuinely confused. "From what?" "If you have to ask, that's part of the problem." I hung up before he could respond. Alex closed her laptop. "Stay here tonight. We'll figure this out tomorrow." But the next morning brought fresh hell. Linda had let herself into our house again and was organizing my closet when I got home. "Oh good, you're back," she said, not looking up from where she was sorting my clothes into piles. "These really aren't suitable for Ryan's new position. We should donate them." I stood in the doorway, watching her handle my carefully curated wardrobe like discount store rejects. "Get out of my closet, Linda." "Now, dear, there's no need for hostility. I'm helping you understand the standards expected of an executive's wife." "The standards?" My voice was eerily calm. "Like throwing away food I spent hours preparing? Like undermining every decision I make in my own home?" She straightened, smoothing her expensive blouse. "I've raised a successful son. I know what's best for him. You're still learning, and that's okay. But your resistance to guidance is concerning." "Where's Ryan?" "At work, of course. He was very hurt by your behavior last night. I suggested he give you time to collect yourself." Of course she did. I pulled out my phone and started taking pictures of the closet scene. "What are you doing?" Linda's voice sharpened. "Documenting." Alex suggested it might be helpful. Something flickered across Linda's face, the first genuine emotion I'd seen from her. Fear, maybe? But it vanished quickly behind her usual mask of concern. That Alex, she said softly. She's not a very positive influence, is she? I was just telling Ryan how worried I am about your friendship with her. The threat was clear. Back off, or I'll poison Ryan against your best friend, too. I lowered my phone, meeting her gaze. You know what, Linda? Keep sorting. In fact, why don't you just move in? Take over completely? Because this, right here, this is the moment you've finally gone too far. I walked out, leaving her standing among piles of my clothes, and pulled out my phone to text Alex. You're right. I need to document everything, and then I need a lawyer. The family dinner was Linda's idea, of course. A chance to clear the air, she said. I knew better, but I went anyway, dressed in clothes she hadn't managed to donate during her closet raid. Ryan's childhood home loomed before me, all perfect landscaping and pristine windows. Inside, voices drifted from the dining room. I caught fragments of conversation that stopped abruptly when I entered. Camille? Linda's smile didn't reach her eyes. We were just discussing you. Tom, my father-in-law, shot me an apologetic look. He was the only one who seemed genuinely happy to see me. Ryan told us about your emotional outbursts lately, Linda continued, arranging silverware that was already perfectly aligned. We're concerned. Are we? I looked at Ryan. Or is this another private discussion between you and your mother? Ryan shifted uncomfortably. Cam, don't start. Actually, Linda interrupted, there's something we need to address. She pulled out an envelope from her purse. I didn't want to bring this up, but given your recent behavior. My stomach dropped as she removed several printed pages. I recognized them immediately, screenshots of text messages between Alex and me, discussing Linda's behavior and my plans to document everything. Going through my phone, Ryan? My voice was barely above a whisper. When? He couldn't meet my eyes. Mom needed to show me... Show you what? I snatched the papers from Linda's hands. That I'm tired of being undermined in my own marriage? That I'm documenting your mother's abuse? Abuse? Linda's voice cracked with practiced emotion. Is that what you're telling people about me? About our family? She turned to Ryan. You see, this is exactly what I warned you about. The signs were there from the beginning. Signs of what? I demanded. Your instability, dear. Your paranoid tendencies, just like your mother. The room went silent. Tom's fork clattered against his plate. What are you talking about? I asked, but deep down I already knew. Linda had been digging. It wasn't hard to find out about your mother's hospitalization, Linda said softly. The mental health issues that run in your family. Why didn't you tell us before the wedding, Camille? My mother's breakdown after my father's death had been private, a brief, dark period she'd recovered from completely. I'd never told Ryan's family because it wasn't their business. But now... You investigated my family? I turned to Ryan. And you knew about this? Mom was worried, he mumbled. She thought I should know. Know what? That my mother needed help after watching my father die? That she got that help and recovered? Unlike some people who just manipulate and destroy everything they touch? Linda gasped. Ryan, do you hear how she talks to me? Enough. Tom's voice cut through the tension. Linda, this is cruel, even for you. Stay out of this, Linda snapped at her husband. Our son needs to understand what kind of woman he married. I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor. You want to know what kind of woman I am, Linda? I'm the kind who's done playing your games. I turned to Ryan. And you? You went through my phone, shared private conversations with your mother, helped her dig up painful parts of my past to use against me. Camille, please. Ryan reached for my hand. We can work this out. I pulled away. Can we? Because right now, I'm not sure what's worse, your mother's manipulation, or the fact that you're too weak to stand up to it. Don't you dare call my son weak, Linda hissed. Why not? It's the truth. And here's another truth. I'm done with all of this. With you, with your games, and with my spineless husband who can't cut the umbilical cord. I walked out, ignoring Ryan's calls behind me. In my car, my hands shook as I pulled out my phone and dialed Alex. Remember when you said I should document everything? My voice was steady despite the tears streaming down my face. Well, now I need that lawyer, and I need you to help me plan something special for Linda, something she'll never see coming. The line was quiet for a moment. Then Alex said, "Come over, we've got work to do." The text from Tom came 3 days after the disastrous dinner. "Coffee? Just us. Need to talk." We met at a small cafe across town, far from Linda's usual haunts. Tom looked older than I remembered, his shoulders heavy with something more than years. "I've been watching this happen before," he said, sliding into the booth. "With Ryan's first serious girlfriend in college. Linda drove her away too. But this..." He pulled out his phone. "This is different." He showed me a video, Linda in their kitchen, speaking to someone off camera. "Camille's becoming a problem," her voice crackled through the speaker. "We need to handle this before she ruins everything. Ryan's finally getting somewhere in his career, and I won't let her emotional instability destroy that." When was this? My coffee went cold, untouched. "Last week, before she dug up that information about your mother." Tom's expression hardened. "She's been planning this for months, building a case against you." "Why are you showing me this?" "Because I failed the last time, stayed quiet, watched that poor girl crumble under Linda's schemes." He leaned forward. "But you're different, you're fighting back, and I want to help." My phone buzzed, Ryan calling again. I declined it, watching 3 text messages pop up immediately. "He's worried," Tom said. "But not about you, about losing control. Linda's taught him well." "I can't keep living like this," I admitted. "But leaving, everyone will blame me. They'll say I gave up, that I'm unstable, just like Linda wants them to think." "Unless you change the narrative." Tom pulled out a manila envelope. "I've been keeping records, dates, incidents, witnesses, Linda's pattern of behavior, not just with you, but with everyone she sees as a threat to her control over Ryan." I opened the envelope with trembling fingers. Years of documented manipulation lay before me. Notes, photos, emails, a systematic dismantling of anyone who got too close to Ryan. "Why didn't you stop her?" "I tried once, early in our marriage." His smile was bitter. "Nearly lost everything, including custody of Ryan. Linda's very good at turning things around, making herself the victim. I learned to document instead of confront." My phone buzzed again, this time with a text from Linda. "Ryan's heartbroken. If you come home now, we can work through your issues together, as a family." Tom read the message over my shoulder and snorted. Translation: "Come back so I can finish destroying you." "I won't," I said, surprising myself with the steel in my voice. "But I need to be smart about this. Linda's already painting me as unstable. If I move too quickly, she'll use it against you," Tom finished. "But what if you gave her exactly what she expects? Let her think she's winning while I what? While you build your case. Linda's confident right now, sloppy. The more evidence you gather, the harder it'll be for her to spin this her way." I studied Tom's face. "Why help me now? Why not earlier?" "Because earlier, you were trying to save your marriage. Now?" He gestured to the documentation. "Now you're trying to save yourself, and that's a fight worth backing." My phone lit up with another message. Alex this time. "Meeting with the lawyer set for tomorrow. You ready?" I looked at Tom's evidence, then at my father-in-law's weary, determined face. "I need to copy all of this," I said. "And then we need to talk strategy. Linda wants a war? Let's give her one she'll never forget." "Be careful," Tom warned. "Linda's dangerous when she's cornered." So am I. I gathered the documents, my mind already racing with possibilities. And, unlike her previous victims, I know exactly what I'm dealing with. No more playing defense. It's time to show Linda what happens when she picks the wrong target. As I left the cafe, I felt lighter somehow. Not because the path ahead was clear, but because for the first time, I wasn't fighting this battle alone. And sometimes, that's all the advantage you need. Linda's annual charity gala was her crown jewel, the event where she paraded her perfect family in front of Seattle's elite. This year, she'd insisted I attend, despite our growing tension. Now I knew why. The ballroom sparkled with crystal and old money, but Linda's smile gleamed sharper than both as she clinked her glass for attention. I'd like to thank everyone for supporting our cause, helping families affected by mental illness. My champagne glass nearly slipped from my fingers. Next to me, Alex tensed. This cause is particularly close to our hearts, Linda continued, her eyes finding mine across the room. Sometimes these struggles touch our own families in ways we never expect. The room blurred. She wouldn't dare. My dear daughter-in-law's family has faced these challenges personally. Camille, darling, would you share your story? Your courage could inspire others. The silence felt like a noose. Dozens of faces turned toward me, expecting inspiration, expecting vulnerability, expecting me to play my assigned role in Linda's performance. I set my glass down with deliberate care. You're right, Linda. Family struggles with mental illness are important to discuss. I stepped forward, voice steady. Like the way some people use manipulation and gaslighting to control their loved ones. That's a form of emotional abuse, isn't it? Linda's smile flickered. Perhaps this isn't the appropriate venue, but you brought it up. I moved closer to the center of the room. Let's talk about it. About mothers who can't let go of their sons. About wives who document their mother-in-law's systematic emotional abuse. About husbands who check their wives' phones for their mothers. Camille. Ryan appeared at my elbow, voice low. You're making a scene. Am I? Or is your mother finally facing consequences? Linda recovered quickly, laughing lightly. You see what stress can do? Ryan, perhaps you should take Camille home. She's clearly overwhelmed. I'm not going anywhere. I pulled out my phone, opened my gallery. Actually, I'd love to share some documentation with everyone. Texts, videos, evidence of years of calculated... Ryan grabbed my wrist. Stop it. Now. The room went silent. Even Linda looked shocked at her son's grip on my arm. Choose carefully, Ryan, I said quietly. Everyone's watching. He released me like I'd burned him, but the damage was done. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Tom stepped forward, but Linda intercepted him. I think, she announced, we should give Camille some space. Clearly, she's having one of her episodes. Episodes? I laughed, the sound sharp enough to cut. Is that what we're calling resistance to abuse now? Tell me, Linda, did you call it an episode when you drove away Ryan's college girlfriend too? Or do you have different labels for different victims? That's enough! Ryan's voice cracked like a whip. Mom's right, you need help. The room spun slightly. In that moment, seeing Ryan stand beside his mother, watching their united front against me, something inside me, finally, irrevocably broke. You're right, I said softly. I do need help. I need a divorce lawyer. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Linda's triumphant smile slipped. This wasn't part of her script. And one more thing. I turned to address the room. Every single person here should know that Linda Thompson's charitable foundation? It's been misappropriating funds for years. Tom has the proof. I'm sure the IRS will be very interested. Linda went pale. You're lying. Am I? Check your files again, Linda. While you were busy digging up my family's history, you should have been watching your own back. I walked out of the ballroom, head high, Alex right behind me. Behind us, chaos erupted. Linda's carefully orchestrated event, dissolving into scandal and whispers. That wasn't part of the plan, Alex muttered as we reached my car. Plans change. I slid behind the wheel, hands shaking but voice steady. Call the lawyer. Tell him it's time to file everything, all of it. What about no more waiting, no more strategic patience? Linda wanted to expose my family's struggles with mental health? Fine, but now everyone knows about her family's struggles with fraud. The divorce papers sat on our kitchen table like a loaded gun. Ryan stared at them, his face a mask I no longer recognized. 3 days had passed since the gala, and Linda's empire was crumbling. The IRS investigation already underway, society whispers growing louder. You're really doing this? Ryan's voice was hollow. Destroying my family? Your family destroyed ours first. I moved toward the window, needing distance. Sign them. Mom's reputation is ruined. Her foundation was stealing from people who needed help. Your father proved it. The door burst open. Linda stormed in, mascara smeared, clutching her phone. You vindictive little... She thrust the screen at me. Look what you've done. Local news headlines screamed about the Foundation's investigation. Donor statements, financial discrepancies, Tom's carefully gathered evidence, now public record. Truth hurts, doesn't it? I said quietly. She slapped me. The crack echoed through the kitchen. Ryan didn't move, didn't speak, just watched. You think you've won? Linda's voice shook. You think exposing the Foundation makes you powerful? I raised him. I shaped him. He'll always choose me. I know. I touched my stinging cheek. That's why I'm leaving. Not without consequences. She pulled another paper from her bag. Remember when you signed those loan documents for the boutique renovation? The ones Ryan helped arrange? My stomach dropped. What about them? The signatures? They're problematic. Fraudulent, one might say. Ryan noticed it months ago, didn't you, darling? Ryan wouldn't meet my eyes. Mom, we agreed. Agreed what? To hold it over my head? The pieces clicked together. How long have you been planning this? Since you started pulling away, Ryan admitted. Mom suggested we needed insurance, in case you ever lost control. The room spun. They'd been setting me up for months, maybe longer. Every loan document, every signature, all potential weapons. So here's what happens. Linda smiled, composed again. You drop everything. The divorce, the allegations, all of it. Or Ryan reports the fraud. Your career, your reputation, everything you've built, gone. You'd let her do this? I asked Ryan. Watch your mother destroy me? You destroyed yourself, he said quietly. The emotional instability, the paranoid accusations. Stop! My voice cracked. Just stop pretending this is about my mental health. This is about control. It's always been about control. Linda moved closer, triumphant. Sign a statement. Recant everything you said about the Foundation. Blame it on emotional stress. We'll get you help, make this all go away. I looked at the divorce papers, then at Ryan, the man I'd loved, now a stranger wearing my husband's face. Everything I'd built, everything I'd fought for, balanced on a knife's edge. My phone buzzed. A text from Tom. Don't give in. Trust me. Well? Linda demanded. What's it going to be? I picked up the divorce papers, hands steadied despite everything. You know what the difference is between us, Linda? You destroy people because you're afraid of losing control. I'm destroying your control because I'm done being afraid. You'll lose everything, Ryan warned. I already have. I walked to the door, divorce papers clutched to my chest. But here's what you don't understand. I'd rather lose everything fighting back than keep anything by giving in. You'll regret this, Linda called after me. When the police come, when your career implodes. Maybe. I turned back one last time. But not as much as you're going to regret underestimating me. I walked out, got in my car, and drove to Alex's apartment. My hands shook as I called Tom. They have evidence of fraud, I said when he answered. They're going to... Let them try! His voice was steel. Remember those documents I showed you? There's more, much more, including proof that Ryan and Linda coerced those signatures. We just needed them to show their hand. I closed my eyes, breathing deeply. So what now? Now? I could hear him smile. Now we show them what real consequences look like. The boardroom of Ryan's company felt like a courtroom, with Linda and Ryan on one side of the table, me on the other. Tom sat beside me, a manila envelope between us. Linda's lawyer kept checking his phone, probably watching their foundation's stock price continue to plummet. Let's make this quick, Linda said, her composure cracking around the edges. We all know why we're here. Do we? I opened my laptop. Because I'm here to discuss corporate fraud, coercion, and witness tampering. What are you here for? Ryan shifted uncomfortably. Camille, please. We can handle this privately. Like you handled those loan documents? Tom's voice cut through the room. The ones you and your mother manipulated to set up my daughter-in-law? Linda's lawyer leaned forward. Careful with accusations. Oh, these aren't accusations. I turned my laptop around, displaying emails between Ryan and Linda, discussing their plan to forge my signatures, to create their insurance policy against me. These are facts, documented, time-stamped facts. The color drained from Linda's face. How did you get your emails? I smiled. Tom's not just an engineer. He's a very good one, especially when it comes to digital security. This is illegal, Linda's lawyer protested. Accessing private... Actually, Tom interrupted. As a board member of the foundation and Ryan's father, I had full legal access. The real question is whether the SEC will be more interested in these emails or the foundation's creative accounting. Ryan stood abruptly. You're bluffing. You wouldn't destroy your own career just to... To what, Ryan? To protect myself? To expose the truth? I kept my voice steady. Unlike you, I'm not afraid of losing everything. I already did, the moment you chose her over me. Linda's laugh was brittle. So this is revenge? Destroying what I built because I saw through your act? No. I opened the manila envelope, sliding documents across the table. This is justice. Signed statements from 3 other women, your son's ex-girlfriends, all documenting your pattern of manipulation, emotional abuse, and financial coercion. You found them? For the first time, real fear flickered across Linda's face. Tom found them. Turns out they were all waiting for someone to finally stand up to you. Ryan grabbed the statements, scanning them frantically. Mom? What is this? It's nothing, darling. Just more of Camille's paranoid. Stop, Ryan's voice cracked. Just stop lying. Please. The silence that followed felt like glass about to shatter. Here's what happens next, I said quietly. You both sign these papers admitting to the fraud attempt against me. The Foundation investigation continues, but focuses solely on financial mismanagement, not criminal charges. You, I looked at Ryan, resign from the company quietly. And you, I turned to Linda, step down from all charity boards effective immediately. Or, Linda's voice was barely a whisper, or everything goes public. The emails, the statements, the fraud attempts, everything. Ryan slumped in his chair. You've won. Is that what you want to hear? No. I stood, gathering my things. What I wanted was a husband who chose me. What I wanted was a family who respected me. What I'm settling for is making sure you never do this to anyone else. Linda grabbed my arm as I turned to leave. You think this makes you strong? You're just proving how unstable. Take your hand off me. My voice could have frozen fire. Your gaslighting doesn't work anymore. Neither does your control. It's over, Linda. You lost. She released me like I'd burned her. As I reached the door, Ryan called out, I'm sorry, I should have... Should have what? Been stronger? Loved me more? Protected me? I didn't turn around. Save your apologies, Ryan. They're worth about as much as your promises. Walking out of that boardroom felt like emerging from underwater. Everything sharper, clearer, the weight of their manipulation finally lifting from my shoulders. Tom followed, carrying copies of everything. You okay? He asked. No. I smiled, surprising myself. But I will be. For the first time in years, I actually believe that. Behind us, through the closing door, I heard Linda's sharp intake of breath as her lawyer presumably explained just how completely she'd lost control. It wasn't quite justice, but it was enough. The boutique's grand reopening drew quite a crowd, though not for the reasons Linda would have expected. Society wives who once feared her influence now whispered behind their hands, watching me cut the ribbon with undisguised curiosity. The woman who took down Linda Thompson had become something of a local legend. Quite the turnout, Alex said, adjusting a display, though I noticed certain people are missing. I smoothed down my dress, one Linda had deemed unsuitable months ago. Tom called this morning, said Ryan's finally moved out of their house, started therapy. And Linda? Still denying everything, last I heard, but her social calendar's surprisingly empty these days. The bell above the door chimed. I turned, greeting frozen on my lips as Ryan stepped inside. He looked different, thinner, older somehow. The crowd's chatter died down. I won't stay. he said quickly. I found this while packing. He held out a small box. Inside was the necklace I'd worn on our first date. Thought you might want it back. I don't. He nodded, unsurprised. I'm leaving Seattle. Fresh start, away from... He gestured vaguely, meaning clear. Away from Linda, away from the wreckage. Good for you. I told Mom I won't be calling for a while. That I need to figure out who I am without her voice in my head. He paused. Without her voice telling me who you were. And who am I, Ryan? Someone stronger than I ever gave you credit for. He set the box down. Someone I should have protected, not helped tear down. A young woman entered the boutique, glancing between us uncertainly. I recognized her, one of Linda's previous victims, now a successful attorney who'd helped build our case. Your 10 o'clock's here, Alex murmured. Ryan took the hint. I just wanted to say what you did, exposing everything. It wasn't just revenge, it was revolution. All these women Mom hurt over the years, they're finally speaking up. The whole system she built, the way she controlled everyone, it's crumbling. That wasn't my goal. Wasn't it? He smiled sadly. Maybe not consciously, but you did something none of us were brave enough to do. You stood up to her. Really stood up to her. I stood up for myself, I corrected. There's a difference. He nodded, turning to leave. At the door, he paused. I'm sorry, Camille. Not just for what happened, but for who I was. Who I let her make me. I know. I met his gaze steadily. But your apology doesn't change anything. No, he agreed. But maybe that's the point. Maybe some things shouldn't be fixed. Just learned from. After he left, Alex squeezed my shoulder. You okay? I watched through the window as Ryan walked away, shoulders straight, but heavy with recognition. Behind me, Linda's former victim, now my client, waited to discuss her own journey to freedom. Around us, the boutique hummed with new energy, transformed from Linda's battlefield into my sanctuary. You know what's funny? I turned to Alex. For years, I thought winning meant making Linda suffer like she made me suffer, making Ryan understand how much he hurt me. But now I realize winning isn't about them at all. It's about me, about who I became while fighting back. The young attorney stepped forward, others gathering around her. Women Linda had tried to break, now standing tall in a space I'd reclaimed. Not just customers, survivors, warriors. Ready to get started? I asked them, and their collective strength filled the room like sunlight after a storm. This wasn't the ending I'd imagined when I first started fighting back. It was better, because revenge might have taken Linda down. But justice? Justice had lifted all of us up. I picked up Ryan's box, the necklace inside catching the light. Not a reminder of what I'd lost, but of what I'd found. My voice, my strength, my truth. I handed it to Alex. Add it to the donation pile, I said. Someone else might need it more. Someone just starting their own revolution.